Just as I was mentioning, though, tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about the American Civil War. There's several different answers that need to be solved. There's a lot of tensions that have went on over this issue throughout the years leading up to this war. If you just look at the foundations of the United States all the way from the founding, you can see that there's going to be trouble down the road. And one thing I always like to say, whenever the founding fathers are literally signing these documents that are some of the founding documents of this country with the Constitution, there's so many things that are left vague on how you can interpret it, whether it comes to the secession issue or the institution of slavery. There's a lot of questions that need to be answered. And throughout the 1820s up to the 1860s, there's multiple compromises that come into play, whether there's going to be these slave states that are, or the free states that are originating out west in the Western territories. Who's going to have the most political power in the United States between them? By 1860, you have the election. It's very divided. You have President Lincoln on the Republican ticket, and then you have Stephen Douglas as the Northern Democrat, and then John Breckinridge for the Southern Democrat, and then John Bell, who's running on the Unionist ticket. So that whole region of the South is divided in three different ways how they're going to vote in this election. But as we know, President Lincoln's going to be elected. He's really pushing to keep the expansion of slavery out of the new Western territories. And there's a lot of southern states that fear that they might lose that institution all along, all this money that people have invested into it. So by December 20th of 1861, South Carolina declares secession. And then it's shortly after that you have Mississippi secede, and then Florida, and then Alabama, and so forth. Just think about all of these men that are hearing these cries for volunteers to fight. No one's ever seen a war on this massive scale. And one thing I really want to show you real quick is this image of a soldier. He's from this community around here. This is Private Harris Casey. And if you see this uniform that he's wearing, it's got this coat tail on it. And this is what all the guys of the 19th Alabama Company I, the Cherokee Rangers, wear whenever they start enlisting and they actually go to they all form up at Old Coloma on up the road here on Highway 9, just probably 6 miles north of Piedmont. There's a lot of guys from Cross Plains that enlist in Company I of the 19th Alabama. And Cross Plains is what Piedmont was called at the time. One reason I wanted to show you this, I just think about all these young men that are enlisting with these cries to serve for the Confederacy. This is one guy in that mix, and just thinking about the state of Alabama, there's about 80,000 plus soldiers that are going to serve the Confederacy from Alabama. One other reason I wanted to show that image, I just recently had this uniform ordered and made to fit me. That's a complete copy of this that Harris Casey is wearing. It also, if you go down in the bottom room, we have a display of a local from Cross Plains named John Craig, and he's wearing the same exact jacket. But the 19th Alabama, they'll serve in many important fights throughout the war during the Western Theater. At places like Shiloh, they'll go into the invasion in Kentucky. They'll fight at Stones River up in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. They'll fight at the Battle of Chickamauga, the battles around Chattanooga, fight during the Atlanta campaign, and then they'll be with John Bell Hood's Confederate Army of Tennessee as they're moving through Alabama and fight around Franklin and Nashville and then eventually ended with the surrender around North Carolina, around Benton. But one reason I wanted to say that, just think about how many men are leaving this community. The only residents that are in this area are really old men that can't go and fight physically, and women and children, and then some of the enslaved people around here. But with that being said, how does the war come to this area of Cross Plains and Calhoun County? Well, there's really nothing of significance around here. One thing I think a lot of people don't realize with battles, an army just doesn't plop out of nowhere and just have an engagement in this full battle. There's a lot of logistics that comes down to it. You have to move wagon trains, you need a railroad access for supplies, and many other things like that. So there's really no rail connections around this area. If you saw the historical marker right outside the depot, it's talking about the Selma-Rome-Dalton Railroad. And before that, it was nicknamed, well, it's named the Alabama and Tennessee Rivers Railroad. It was supposed to stretch from Selma, Alabama, and go all the way to Gunner's Landing, which is Gunnersville today. But as the years are going on from the 1850s, in 1861, they'll have to end the rail line just a little bit south of here, just north of Anniston, at Blue Mountain. Has anybody ever heard of Blue Mountain? It's not the greatest community to be in. There used to be a lot of manufacturing and textile mills there, but Blue Mountain was a very moving spot in the time of the 1860s. That was the end of the railroad connecting to Selma. So it was a really important staging point for supplies. There was a prisoner of war camp there at one point, and they actually trained Confederate soldiers there on that side. And the reason why I'm leading up to this with Blue Mountain is very important with the story that I'm going to lead up to with the happenings in 1864. So, with General Sherman's march towards Atlanta, he started this in early May of 1864. With his army, he's outmaneuvered Joe Johnston at several places like Rocky Face Ridge, and then Resaca, and then Altoona Pass, and then they have some fighting around New Hope Church. But eventually, William Tecumseh Sherman's men will take the city of Atlanta in early September of 1864. With the losing of Atlanta, this is a very important setback for the Confederacy. And John Bell Hood, if you've ever heard of him, he has a lot of fame for having the Texas Brigade at the start of the war. But John Bell Hood, he is now in charge of the Army of Tennessee. And it has about 45,000 men at that time, I believe, or around 50,000. He decides, instead of them falling back, that they need to go on the offensive and try to move northward and try to strike the important rail center and supply line of the Union Army that's up in Nashville, Tennessee. So Hood, he launches this offensive as he's driving northward. He's going up the valleys of Georgia, and then he's going to swing back to the east, the west, my bad, going through the area of Little River. If you know that section of North Cherokee County, he's going down Broomtown Valley, and he's going to headquarter there. As he's doing this, William Tecumseh Sherman's Union Army is following him along the way. And there, at that time, around the Gainesville Little River area, you have about 50,000, 45,000 Confederate soldiers that come through that area. And then you have 70,000 Union soldiers that come through that area. So just think about how much corn and the crops that these civilians are eating are getting destroyed and devastated and taken away by both of these armies as they're moving through this little area. There's nothing really left for these people around Gillespie. But as Hood's army is moving to the west, with the hopes of crossing the Tennessee River at some point, whether that be Gunnersville, Gunners Landing at that time, or out around Tuscumbia. They're trying to move westward and pull Sherman with him, as well as trying to get up into Tennessee and strike Nashville. As Hood's column is moving to the west, he arrives in Gadsden, Alabama, and he's going to talk with the new commander over this region, General Beauregard. And after they're studying what they wanted to do, Hood decides to keep on going towards Nashville. He has Confederate cavalry all throughout the valley, from basically Lookout Mountain through Turkeytown, on through the area following Terrapin Creek on down to this area, just protecting his flank and his rear. And this is how it comes into this story. How does the war come to this area? So I printed out this map, and if I orientate it correctly with the lay of the land, this just lies probably about 4 or 5 miles north of where we live. This is Terrapin Creek right here, and I'll pass this around for you to view it. But there's 2 roads that Federal cavalry are sent to go and do some reconnaissance towards Blue Mountain, that important staging area, to find and destroy those Confederate supplies. There's a fording area right here on the old Ladiga Road, which is what it's called today. At that time, during the Civil War, it was called the Jacksonville and Rome Road. It was a very important road, and it was one of the crossing points down here at the crossroads in town. This is why this is called Cross Plains, because of the 2 important stagecoach lines that cross here. There was another road that crossed in an area called Polecat Ford. Has anybody ever heard of that? The reason why it's called Polecat Ford, apparently prior to the white settlers coming to this area, there was a Creek Indian village there that was led by Chief Polecat. And that's a very important crossing. I just recently floated the creek and saw both of these locations, and it's still pretty shallow in those areas where you can see where the fording crosses were for these men as they crossed. Another thing important to mention with the Civil War, at Polecat Ford also, the year prior to this, in 1863, a man by the name of John Wisdom rides across that ford. He's nicknamed the Paul Revere of the South because he's sworn in, and goes all the way from Gadsden, Alabama to Rome, Georgia, 70 miles on horseback or mule or pony at several different stages as he's switching mounts. But he is warning the folks in Rome about these Union raiders coming through under Colonel Abel Strait. But that was something I wanted to note. But if y'all would like to pass that around, look at that to kind of understand where the areas are. There's probably about 2 miles in between those roads. But at this moment, I kind of want to read you some of the official reports that these soldiers are giving back to their commanding officers, reporting about what's going on. This one right here is actually from William Hicks Jackson. He is a cavalry commander in the Confederate Army, and his men are posted on the west bank or on the south side of that drawing, on the Ladiga side. And they're using Terrapin Creek as a defensive line, having that as an obstacle against the Union soldiers if they attempt to try to cross at those 2 fording areas. But this is what William Hicks Jackson will write to General Joseph Wheeler, who's headquartered at Jacksonville, Alabama at this time. There used to be a plaque at his headquarters site, but that plaque is missing at the time. I've been trying to figure out where it's at. I believe it's in the early 1900s, the United Daughters of the Confederacy erected one at that site, and it's where the Amoco gas station is, the old gas station that's right there on Highway 21, just south of the square. You know where that's at. It's a really old gas station. It's trying to think another location. If you know where Brothers Bar is in Jacksonville, it's literally across the street from Brothers Bar. That's I don't know if that's if you do know where that is, I don't know if that's a bad thing to say or not. But this is what William Hicks Jackson will write to Mr. Willard. I have withdrawn Armstrong and Ross's brigades and now on the move for the army. I have left Ferguson in command of the cavalry on the side of the river, which embraces his own, and Golston's and Morgan's brigades. They are now posted as follows. And this is a little bit prior. This is on October 24th. But he goes on to say that I have sent this information to General Ferguson, who's a Confederate general, who was in Cedartown, and suggested him that in case the report was true, that the enemy should advance toward this place to concentrate his force at Ladiga, at that fording area on that mountain, and also direct Colonel Lowry to scout well up the river and keep you informed on the enemy's movements. My command will cross at Greensport, which is what Leesburg is today. I will arrive at Gadsden early tomorrow and shall expect, if convenient to you, to meet you there. I shall try to reach Gadsden between 11 and 12. The Confederates are just trying to figure out where the Union Army is at this point. They know that some of them are up in Gadsden, but there's cavalry, federal cavalry all throughout the valley as they're having forage parties trying to figure out, finding grist mills and getting the flour milled down and any kind of crops they can scour the land for. Another account that comes up I want to read is actually from a federal perspective. And this is coming from General J. H. Wilson, who's a major general at the time. This is on Terrapin Creek, October the 27th, 1864, at 1:40 p.m. He'll write to Sherman and say, a prisoner detached as a scout from one of Wheeler's regiments near Gadsden says could march from that place. The 1st Corps at 4 a.m., the 2nd at daylight, the 3rd at noon last Saturday, that they have spent making all night before, in which everybody was informed that they were going to Gunner's Landing. This is talking about Hood trying to move northward up into Nashville as this prisoner, that Confederate prisoner that the Union soldiers had captured. Citizens confirm this story. I've sent a regiment up the east bank of the creek with instructions to go to Ladiga and beyond. Another to go through Goshen and cross plains and as far toward Jacksonville as possible, to bring in every man, horse, or mule they can find, and to ascertain positively what is at Blue Mountain. Wheeler is at Gadsden on Monday and had 2 divisions at Turkeytown, and General Guard was there on Tuesday. Jackson seems to be yet between here and the railroad. So you can just see that from Wilson's point of view, they're trying to send up these federal scouts to see what exactly is at the Blue Mountain Depot, just north of Anniston. They're trying to see what supplies are there. As it goes on later on, they'll find out there's really nothing at Blue Mountain now. And the reason for it, as John Bell Hood's Army of Tennessee is in Gadsden, they literally get every article of shoes, clothing, cartridges, anything of supplies that they can get from Blue Mountain. They're shipping from wagons all the way from that area around Anniston all the way to Gadsden. I've read several reports from the ORs from soldiers receiving this. There was one from a soldier from the 24th South Carolina Infantry that said as they marched to Gadsden that a lot of their men didn't have any shoes because they had been worn out and they had not received any supplies. And after they received some supplies from Blue Mountain, they had most of their men with fresh shoes. But the Union soldiers don't know that at this time. And at this moment, I want to read the dispatch that Wilson writes the evening of October 28th, 1864. Because this is when the skirmishes are going to take place along Ladiga at the ford crossing there, and then just downstream at Polecat Ford that very same day around the Goshen Valley. This is what General Wilson will write. General, your dispatch has just received prisoners from Ross and Morgan's brigades taken about the head of Terrapin Creek indicate the correctness of my prisoners' information in regard to the whereabouts of Jackson. The reconnaissance on the Jacksonville Road met strong resistance at Goshen, drove 50 or 60 men out of their line of rail breastworks and into back upon another from which they couldn't drive them. And the reason why he's mentioning these breastworks, the Confederates have literally, I've read some accounts that they've dug in on the west bank and they have that defensive area, plus the Terrapin Creek as that boundary. But you can see that from the Federals' accounts that they're riding into this strong defensive position that the Confederate cavalry hold. The regiment toward Ladiga had a similar experience near that place. Jackson's entire division came to this neighborhood 4 days ago for the purpose of covering the Alabama Railroad. I don't think any part of it was toward Villarica. At all events, prisoners say it's all between Jacksonville and here. And then as he goes on, he states that one of the prisoners reports that the removal of the stores from Blue Mountain that he helped unload them, and it is positive that there's nothing left there at that place. So that's where I was going at. That Hood's literally brought all the supplies out of Blue Mountain as the Confederate Army is moving up towards Tennessee, which this is later going to result in the bloody battle up at Franklin on November the 30th. So this is a whole month later when that battle will happen. It's a very bloody fight up there on November 30th, 1864. But all of these Union soldiers will be repulsed from crossing the creek, and they decide to pull on back with Sherman's army. And that's really what's going to conclude the fight. The Confederate cavalry have held strong. And as I was mentioning with Mr. Reinhardt earlier, he had mentioned, well, there used to be a historical marker there on Highway 278 by the Piedmont Waterworks that talked about the Ladiga Cavalry Skirmish, and it had October 28th, 1864, and it goes on to say that Ferguson's Confederate cavalry held off Kilpatrick's Union cavalry at this position. Hood's going up towards Nashville, and Sherman initiates the march to the sea following this. Because Hood's going in that direction northward, Sherman sees him not as a threat. He's already talked about these aspirations of going towards Savannah, so the Union Army is going to turn in the opposite direction and start going on the march to the sea, destroying anything that's vital to the Confederate war effort as they make their way to Savannah. But what about the casualties that take place at Ladiga and Goshen? There's still a lot of stuff that could be found on this. One thing that's really cool and then sometimes frustrating with history is it's not recorded the best. And there's always new information that we can find. There might be some letters up in somebody's attic up in Indiana that have specific information talking about this skirmish. If they're found, there's always something new coming out. But I had recently found several newspaper articles. There's still a lot to dig on this, but in many of them they'll report that about 25 federal soldiers were killed or wounded at Ladiga. And I don't know, I've seen various reports saying that there's no Confederate casualties there, but up at Polecat Ford, it's been recorded in Joe Wheeler's notebook that there were 7 Confederate soldiers killed there or wounded, and then there was about 40 Federals that were killed or wounded there. Whether or not that's correct information, that's up to debate. And one reason why I say that, one thing that's really frustrating with reading about the Civil War, anything that's dealing with Wheeler's Confederate Cavalry, there's some stuff you got to take with a grain of salt with this man. And the reason why I say that, some of the numbers he'll give of how many Federals they've killed, it's a lot more than what actually is there. There's a lot of exaggeration. Sometimes the Confederate casualties that are killed, he reports them lower, so he doesn't get in trouble for having all the casualties there. But one person I wanted to mention, though, there's a newspaper article that will appear about 5 days after this event occurs in the Mobile, Alabama newspaper. And it goes on to say, I haven't figured out whether or not it's talking about Ladiga or Goshen. There's just, the information that it talks about is very confusing, but I think it's probably at Polecat Ford what it's talking about. If I had my phone, I would read it word for word, but basically it's saying that this fight lasted about 1 hour and 10 minutes between the Confederates and the Union soldiers. And it said that there were several of the Union soldiers that were captured, several that were wounded. The Confederates captured some of the colors, the flags of the Union soldiers were captured. But it goes on to say that there was a wounded officer in the 2nd Alabama Cavalry that was mortally wounded that had been reported. I've always wondered who this was exactly. And there was a good friend of mine that had sent me this recently. And this is the grave and tombstone of Lieutenant William H. Harris. And why I'm showing you this, I have looked him up on the Soldiers and Sailors database, and he comes up as a 2nd lieutenant in the 2nd Alabama Cavalry, Company G. So that's probably that officer, and look what's right on his tombstone. I know you can't see it from here, but I'll pass it around. But it says, born on May the 27th, 1840, fell mortally wounded October 28th, 1864, in a battle with the Federal Cavalry near Jacksonville, Alabama, and died November 2nd, 1864. So that is that officer that is mortally wounded, and he's buried down in South Alabama. I have the graveyard. It's actually probably where he mustered out of, because there's a lot of South Alabama companies that come out for the 2nd Alabama Cavalry. But with that, that's really the only action that's going to occur around this area of Cross Plains. This is just a very small village at the time. There's several armies that come around this area through this valley. One thing I think that's a major fortunate thing for these civilians that live around here, most of the armies are always north of the Coosa River. They can't cross to the south bank. So many of the people around here don't lose tremendous amounts of livestock in their crops like the people up in Gillsville do. But there's several times that people do come through this area with the armies, but there's no kind of major battle like Chickamauga or Gettysburg or Antietam around here. It's just these little skirmishes. There are some Federals that do come around this area and destroy some of the stores at Blue Mountain in the latter part of the war in 1865. And one thing that was very interesting, I want to note with that real quick, is that that's literally at the end of the war. I think Lee's already surrendered at that point. But one thing that Croxton's Union Brigade mentioned as they're burning these rail cars at Blue Mountain, the explosion of these shells that have the black powder in them. And one of my buddies that has a metal detector around that area has found these shell fragments where they were exploding shells. So that literally is piecing that story back together exactly where the Blue Mountain Depot or Arsenal was located at that time. But there's always still a lot of stuff that could be found out or discovered with this topic. It's history is a really fun thing to study into. But one thing I want to end out on, just think about the impacts of the Civil War. I know in this next month I'm going to be doing a program talking about some of the events that are happening in Reconstruction, but just think about the aftermath of the American Civil War. There's over 750,000 Americans that are going to lose their lives in this war. Just think about those families that do not have that father figure or that son that's sitting at the dining table with them no more. They don't know where their sons or their fathers or uncles are laid out. They're buried in shallow graves most of the time, or mass graves on some of these battlefield sites all throughout the Southeast. But what did the Civil War do? It brought us back as one nation under God. We wasn't defined as the South, East, or West, or the North. We was just one nation under God, and it defined what the nation was going to lead to. More of this government being more of a strong centralized government. And also, it destroyed that institution of slavery, freeing over 4 million slaves all throughout the Southeast. It really changed a lot of the foundations of what these people were living from. There's a huge change that's happening at the time. It's all of a sudden. And with big changes like that, there's always going to be people that are pushing back against that change. I mean, just think about it in modern times. There's a lot of people, I don't think, that are really big on these electric vehicles. How can that work? But I was talking with an individual about this the other day. He said, and my grandpa probably thought the same thing when gasoline engines were being invented. How can anything be better than these horse and buggies? But I think a lot of people, it's hard to go through that change. But I hope you learned a little bit about this area, some of the effects that this town faces. I mean, there's these main veterans that come back to this area. For example, one of the mayors of Piedmont, Captain Joseph Nathaniel Hood, he loses an arm at Chickamauga. He's a one-armed man. Think about what he's having to deal with as he's reverting back to civilian life. But he's going to be a mayor of the town here. But I just want to say a lot of these things and let you think a little bit more in depth on this time period. It's a very complicated period. But I really appreciate y'all listening to me. I know I rambled a lot on this, but if anybody has any questions or comments, please let me know. And I really appreciate y'all attending tonight.
We still don't have a date as to when we're going to dedicate the marker.
No,